Welcome, teachers, to Expectations for the ILLP Classroom. This is Dr. Nicole Teachea McNeil, and I am bringing this tutorial to you because you have an English language learner in your class who is on an ILLP, and you need to include ELP standards in your lesson plan. So by law, we need to provide 4 hours of English instruction to our students. And this is going to show you how we are going to embed that and document it to ensure we're meeting the needs of our students as well as be in compliance with the state. So the objective for this tutorial is that you identify ILLPs or ILLPs in your lesson plan by taking notes on how to include English language proficiency standards in lesson plans. So what we need to include by law, we need to include 4 language domains: reading, grammar, vocabulary, oral language, and writing. Because you are an ILLP classroom and not an SEI, you do not have to teach each of these for an hour at a time in isolation. What we do have to do is include a standard for each in your lessons. So at high school, we have English teachers who will include an ELP standard for reading and grammar. Then we have content or elective teachers who will include vocabulary, oral language, and writing standards. We can find these in the attachment A of your ILLP. You should have completed your ILLP, your cover sheet, attachment A, and updated the assessments for quarter 1 in attachment B. Then in your lesson, your objectives need to be aligned to your content standard, meaning you do not need to write an objective for every ELP standard. What we do with our ELP standard is weave those teachings throughout the lesson, and you do not need to include times on your lesson plan. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and demonstrate what this looks like in a lesson plan. First of all, I want to remind us what an attachment A looks like. You should have one for each of your ELL students, but you only need to use the intermediate one to include in your lessons because that's our goal. If we have a student who is pre-emergent or emergent, we want their goal to be that they can meet the intermediate standards. And so you only need to include your intermediate standards in your lesson plan, but you want to look at what is appropriate for basics as well as emergent students. And so you have those ILLPs as well. So if you notice, these are broken down into each of the sections. Again, this one is considered 2 sections, oral language, oral English conversation, and vocabulary. So for this, if you're doing this in an elective or content, you do need to incorporate 2 standards, one for oral English conversation and one for vocabulary. Come down for reading, you need to incorporate one for reading, and you need to incorporate one for writing and one for grammar. If you notice, there aren't a whole lot of standards on here, and so you're going to be working through these standards as we approach the target date. So October passed, so our new target date is December, and as you're moving through these in December, a lot of these are going to repeat because students need more practice. So what does this look like in your lesson plan? Okay, here's an English lesson plan, and we're looking at this standard. If I'm looking at their standard, it's to write a narrative, right? And well-structured events. So what I want to ask myself is what language skills in reading and grammar for English will help my students be better authors of narrative. So I went through the ILLP, scrolled down to reading, read the standards, and found the one that was the best match for writing a narrative. So a student will analyze text for expression. So I copied and pasted it here. And I underlined purpose because I'm only going to use students identifying the purpose of their narrative as for this lesson or for this week. So then the grammar standard was for students to produce sentences, and I underlined subject, verb, and object because that's all I'm going to focus on this week. Throughout the semester, I can continue to add these other parts of it. Now, that's all I have to do. I don't have to write an objective for each of these standards. The next thing I need to do is weave it into my lesson. So this teacher has an editing sheet every day. I want them to focus on subject, verb, object. I want to be sure I include that so that the students can focus on that. And then as we're going through what matters to me project, I want to discuss what is the purpose of what matters to me project and writing a narrative. And then I want students to identify the purpose for their writing their narrative. Now I've embedded the standard, ELP standard, in my lesson. Now I'm going to come down here. They're going to have to complete an exit slip. I would like my ELL students to write a complete sentence using subject, verb, object. And that is it. I have now made this lesson ILLP approved. Okay? The goal is to include your standards and weave it throughout your lesson. The goal is for these standards to help you help your students become better at achieving that grade level standard. So it's here to complement what you're teaching, not add to what you're teaching. Let's go ahead and look at what this looks like in chemistry. Okay, so here's a chemistry one, and this would be content. So the teacher would want to look at oral language, vocabulary, and writing. So when I look at this teacher's standards, I'm going to the ELA standard, and I ask myself, what language skills would support this? I need 3 language standards, one for oral language, one for vocabulary, one for writing. So when I read the standard, it looked like it was about vocabulary. So I went to my ILLP and I found an oral language standard for listening and speaking, and I want the students to practice asking and responding to academic questions in complete sentences. And then I went in and I found a vocabulary one. I want them to acquire vocabulary by determining the meanings of words using multiple strategies in grade level text. And that's what I'm asking them to do here. I want them to use symbols, key terms, domain specific words, and I'm going to show them strategies to do that. Now I'm missing one. I'm missing the writing one. So what writing standard would help my students take better notes, complete a worksheet, or convert a recipe? So I'm going to go back to my attachment A. I'm going to go down to the writing section, and I'm going to find one that would help my students write a better recipe. And I think it would be this one. I want them to use a variety of strategies to write their recipe. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the whole thing, go to chemistry, Control V and paste it. But I don't need both of these, even though both of them would be well. I am going to have them use a variety of organizational strategies. So I'm going to teach them a strategy for organizing a recipe. And that's it. I've already added these. These 3 things will complement my students being able to complete this chemistry lesson. Now I have to weave these standards through my lesson. So I want them to convert here. So I'm going to have them do speaking and listening. And I want them to respond orally to questions. Now I've embedded my listening standard. Then I'm going to come down here and I want to ask myself, where else can I explicitly thread my vocabulary standard? Okay, so we're looking at manic. Okay, notes on the metric system. So here we are going to use vocabulary strategies. Here students are going to apply vocabulary strategies. Okay. Now the last thing I need to do is help students organize their writing. So I'm going to model expectations for organizing. Notice I'm using the keywords a recipe. And then students will follow steps for organizing a recipe. Okay. And then I want them to write a metric staircase, and I'm going to have them share that in a pair share to practice responding to academic questions. And that's it. I have included my oral language, I have included my vocabulary, and I have included my writing standard in chemistry. I believe that all of those examples will help support all your students in acquiring chemistry by using language as a bridge. And now this chemistry lesson is ILP approved. If you have any questions, please go ahead and email me at nicole.mcneil@leonagroup.com, and I would be happy to support you, review your lessons in preparation for any audits, or to continue to support you in working with your English language learners. Thanks for listening.